To set the stage, natural gas is an important but complicated fuel with multiple sources, both conventional and unconventional, domestic and international, multiple uses, power, industrial, residential, and transportation sectors, and multiple uncertainties, including the ultimate size and production cost of the natural gas resource base in the U.S. and globally, the evolution of international gas markets, greenhouse gas mitigation measures that will be adopted in the U.S. and abroad, and the broader energy technology mix as determined by both the cost of different technologies over time and emissions policies. Globally, there are abundant supplies of natural gas, as you've just heard from Ira, much of which can be developed at relatively low cost. And unconventional gas resources, particularly shale gas, will likely make a significant contribution to future U.S. energy supply, with assessments of the recoverable volumes increasing dramatically in recent years. Today's panel will address first and foremost whether natural gas is an ally or an enemy of intermittent renewables, particularly solar and wind. One of the challenges, as you know, with renewable energy is that the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. One of the logical answers, of course, is to build massive and cheap storage capacity, and we'll hear some about that later today. Another, the primary focus of this panel, is that when the wind stops blowing or the sun stops shining, natural gas-fired generation, which is relatively simple, cheap, and clean, can take over. It seems straightforward, doesn't it? Well, like so many things in the energy world, there are an array of issues that, depending upon the facts and your point of view, can make the marriage of renewables and natural gas look like Ozzie and Harriet or the War of the Roses. Consider, on the one hand, if you're in the natural gas industry, you may not be so happy when large-scale solar kicks in on a scorching July day and takes market share that used to be the domain of flexible natural gas peaking plants. If you're in the renewables industry, you may not be so happy with rising natural gas supplies and falling prices as you grind your way down the cost curves for solar and wind. And if you're in the environmental community, you may not be so happy with the large-scale fracturing of rock and potential risk to water supplies that comes with the development of shale gas fields in populated states like New York and Pennsylvania. On the other hand, if you're in the natural gas and renewable industries and the competition is nuclear and coal, then maybe pairing intermittent wind and solar with flexible and moderately priced natural gas generation may start to look attractive. If you're in the utility industry, this may be exactly the package you want to take to your public utility commissioners and the public who pays their salaries. And if you're in the environmental community and you're battling climate change, this marriage between renewables and natural gas, although not perfect, may be one of the key components of accelerating growth in climate-friendly electricity generation. And there is another element to the renewables natural gas dilemma, and that is in the transportation sector. As you know, there are a number of competitors in the race to replace gasoline and diesel in fueling our cars and trucks. These include renewable fuels like ethanol, biodiesel, and biomethane. The transportation fuels wing of the renewable energy industry has been pushing these alternatives hard. Witness, for example, the growth of the ethanol industry. At the same time, the natural gas industry is making a play with compressed natural gas, or CNG, with liquefied natural gas, or LNG, and with natural gas converted to methanol. As in the electricity sector, there are an array of issues when it comes to the role of renewables and natural gas in transportation. And in this case, we may be looking less at collaboration and more at competition when it comes to replacing gasoline. So, will we succeed technically and economically in the transition to cellulose and algae-derived ethanol and thereby radically increase biofuel feedstocks? How likely is it we will develop adequate infrastructure for massive deployment of CNG and LNG vehicles? And of course, what about the new kid on the block, the plug-in electric vehicle that can piggyback so nicely on the greening of our electricity supply with renewables? And in that regard, let me pause for a moment and congratulate John Lochner of GM with us here today on the launch of the Chevy Volt, the car of the year at the Detroit Auto Show. Finally, let me strongly emphasize that any consideration of the interplay of natural gas and renewables, whether in the electricity or transportation fuels contexts, must consider the ultimate killer app in clean energy technology that is here today and ready for massive cost-effective deployment. I refer, of course, to energy efficiency, from the Energy Star refrigerator to LEED buildings to the 60-mile-per-gallon car. And with that, let me ask Andrew Littlefair to give us his perspective. Andrew.
Dan, thank you. Dan asked me to start out and give you an idea of what we do. We focus on natural gas and transportation. We're the only company of our kind that focuses on both CNG and LNG. We have about 225 stations in 23 states. We figured out a long time ago, if you're going to get somebody to switch to an alternative fuel, in our case natural gas, you better have a full portfolio of services to get them over the hump. So we sell compressors and stations in 23 countries. We convert vehicles, like last year about 1,800 for AT&T. We build stations, we sell fuel, we own stations, and we do maintenance. And we do all of this, we help people with grants. We do all of this to make the proposition make sense for the customer. We fuel about 6,000 transit buses every day, and we fuel about 3,500 refuse trucks and about 25,000 vehicles in those 23 states. We're also now developing biomethane. I'm very excited about that. We're taking landfill gas. Our first project was in Texas. We're cleaning up that gas, making it pipeline quality. We're putting it in a pipeline, and we're also using it for trucks in Dallas. And of course, that biomethane is 80% less carbon. But I believe the future for natural gas, and it won't be for every vehicle, it'll have greater applications for high fuel use, centrally focused fleet vehicles, I believe. But there's a lot of fuel that goes into that market. In fact, if you think about it, in the United States, you're using about 175 billion gallons, more or less, and you may have the exact number, of gasoline and diesel. You have 250 million vehicles. 8 million of those vehicles are using 35 billion gallons, mostly diesel. So by focusing in a fairly small place, you can make a pretty big impact. But since 2007, 7 million natural gas vehicles have been added around the world, which I think is pretty impressive. And in each day, 8 natural gas fueling stations are opening up, and 4,000 natural gas vehicles are being put on the road. More truck engines are coming. If we just go back 2 years, you had one engine in one truck, which was a Kenworth. And today you have Cummins, Volvo, Navistar just made an announcement earlier this week, Kenworth, Peterbilt, and Freightliner. So we're seeing interest in those heavy-duty engine platforms and chassis manufacturers. We're fueling about 1,100 natural gas LNG trucks in the Port of LA, and the good news is they've worked great. They save the customers $1 a gallon, and that's given rise to Walmart and Pepsi, and a lot of large fleets now are looking at that fuel. Natural gas has several advantages. Not to get into too much detail, but I think it's important to note is today you have natural gas, and I don't know exactly where it's trading. I think it's around $4.50 or $4.60 an MCF. You get 8 gallons of gasoline equivalent for that $4.60. So you divide it by 8, and you're looking at roughly 60 cents a gallon for the commodity. Now, of course, you have to transport it, and you have to compress it and do other things to it, but let's just add $1 to it, which would be very generous. So you can compete with gasoline at $3.40 today here in Palm Springs, and you can have your natural gas at the station at $1.80. So there's a lot of room. We started out as a very, I think, compelling environmental play, but now it's very economic. It's abundant, of course. I agree with Ira. You know, it looks like the reserves, people are beginning to talk about 4,000 trillion cubic feet. Now, you won't get all of that, but over time, you'll get more and more. So it's very impressive. Today, on an energy equivalency basis, as you know, on a BTU basis, oil and natural gas should trade at, what, 6 or 7 to 1. And today, you're trading at 20 to 1. The gas story has really been a game changer. Even the EIA, who's always a little bit behind, assigned 40 TCF more gas this last year as they looked at our reserves. The rig count today is at 1,700 rigs. That compares to a high in the United States in December of 1980 of 4,500 rigs. Now you're getting, these rigs are more productive in the shale, but you can see that you could, we've been there before, you could ramp up production if you needed it. I'm confident that the independents and those that are exploiting the natural gas shale, working with my friend Carl, are going to have to do it in a safe and environmentally friendly way, and I think that message has been, is beginning to be heard by them. You know, today, only about 20% of the gas that we're using in the United States is coming from the shale. Oil is a different story, and I think we're all here because we believe that, but you, as the world picks up and the U.S. picks up, you're back to about 88 million barrels of oil a day. You added 2 million barrels a day last year, which is the best you've done since 2004. We don't think you can do that again this year. We think it'll be somewhat less than that. And so our view is you got about another year or two before you're going to have a problem with supply and demand. The long and short of my thoughts is that you have enough natural gas in the United States to do all this that you want to do. That wasn't maybe the case a few years back, but you have enough for power gen, you have enough to base load renewables, and you have enough for transportation.
Okay, let me make a very important point about the elephant not in this room, coal. The obstacle which appears to exist to a collaborative relationship between renewables and natural gas is the fact that monopoly public utilities have powerful economic motivation to hold on to uneconomic coal capacity, and they're going to be desperately trying to do it. There was just a study put out by the Brattle Street Group which estimated that by 2020, as a result of government regulations to clean up pollutants like mercury and soot and sulfur, 20 to 25% of the nation's coal-fired capacity would be shut down by 2020. We think it's going to be a little higher. But what was really striking about the Brattle report was they project that 78% of the merchant coal will be gone by 2020, and virtually none of the regulated monopoly coal. Now, it is not that the regulated fleet is more economic. It is that the Southern Company will hold on to it if it possibly can, even though it's more expensive than either renewables or gas. So my big message is, while renewables and gas, when they come to fight for the table scraps, go at it like this, we ought to be after the turkey on the table, which is being held onto by coal. But if we're going to use gas, we need to understand that there are two time horizons and two kinds of strategies. For the next 5 to 10 years, we simply ought to take the existing gas-fired combined cycle fleet and run it more hours. We have a huge unused, in some cases brand new plants that have never operated, highly efficient, very cheap, because it's already been built, natural gas fleet that could displace probably 30% of our existing coal-fired electrons, basically in 6 months. I mean, you could do it that quickly. In that same time period, I think if you look at the transportation, the low-hanging fruit is the fleet vehicles. Vehicles that come back every night to be fueled up, whether it's urban taxis, whether it's garbage trucks, whether, as in much of the third world, it's actually little three-wheelers. We ought to be putting fleet vehicles on natural gas. Longer term, we need to recognize that I think the era of an electricity system in which very large, very remote power stations deliver power into load centers is going to change quite dramatically. One of the things that we do right now is we have these natural gas peakers in places like Queens and Los Angeles. We turn them on a hot summer afternoon. They're very inefficient. They don't burn the gas effectively. They're very dirty, in fact, when you put them in an urban neighborhood. They're noisy. They drive down property values. And they don't solve the problem that urban areas have, which is they have not enough capacity to get electrons into them. What we ought to be doing is replacing those peakers with fuel cells that burn natural gas, which can generate 24-hour baseload power for the urban area and take off the pressure to bring in electrons from hundreds of miles away. We ought to take the existing once-through natural gas plants, of which there are a number in Southern California, and we ought to repower them to be combined cycle. We should not be wasting natural gas, even though we have a lot. And finally, we should be exploring intensely the strategic question for the transportation sector, which is, what are the uses in transportation for which we really unavoidably need a liquid fuel? Well, the obvious one is aviation, and perhaps long-distance trucking. There's some questions about whether LNG can fill that need or not. But the US transportation system simply uses liquid fuels as a default for everything else. And as we move forward, we need to be saying, okay, where can we replace? Can we, for example, power locomotives with fuel cells, in which case locomotives could be powered with natural gas? Looking at the system as a different kind of system is absolutely essential to getting the partnership between natural gas and renewables right. And I think the biggest missing ingredient on the landscape today, and this is, I'm going to toss this challenge out, there is no institution where those who are working to create renewable power and those who have knowledge about natural gas and those who actually are the consumers of both come together to figure out a low-carbon strategy for the future. We need to create a place where that conversation can happen, and it doesn't exist right now.
Vic. Oh, I'm going to start with picking up a little what Andrew said, which is the paucity of oil in the future. People I respect speak to an oil plateau in production. This is not peak oil. This is a fine point, but it's a production plateau that's coming. Whether it's 92 million barrels or 95 or 90 or 100 doesn't matter. Right now, he's saying we're using 86 million barrels a day. We know that transport fluids will be used more. So replacing oil for transportation is critical, aside from the fact it's a national interest. The other point I want to pick up on, Carl's point, and if you want to do what Carl wants to do, which is replace coal-fired with natural gas, my home state of North Carolina is going to mothball 13 coal-fired plants. We've got 5 minutes. I got to watch that like a hawk. The 13 coal-fired plants because they're not meeting environmental standards. And they'll probably have to go to natural gas because we probably don't have wind fast enough and we don't have solar fast enough for sure. So as a transitional fuel, that's what Carl wants. That's one possibility. And Andrew was talking about for transportation and whether we can use it for a long haul or not, we'll argue about. Okay. What does the investment community need in order to be able to do this? They need plentiful supply, domestic plentiful supply preferably, and they need certainty on price. You know what you guys do when there's uncertainty. You just raise your discount rates. That doesn't do anything good for your investment, all right? So what is it about natural gas that I can speak to you about to tell you that there's a certainty that the price will be low to moderate? And the reason that will be the case is because of shale gas. Shale gas is in plentiful supply, but there is something peculiar about shale gas that allows me to make the following prediction. If we have demand holding up the floor, and demand will hold the floor up at $3.50 a million BTU, $4, he says today it's $4.50 probably. What about the ceiling? That's what you guys will care about. Where's the ceiling? Will it go to 14 like it did a few years ago? And will it sort of bounce around unexpectedly? The answer is no. And the answer is no because there's going to be a lid on this driven by the peculiarities of shale gas. And do I have, yeah, I've got time to tell you one aspect of it that makes it possible. And that is, if you already own the lease, from the day you decide to drill for it, you can produce gas in 90 to 180 days. That does not work offshore. That number is 4 years or 5 years. This is a land job, can quickly be done, and so the lid on it will be that when the futures price goes up, the production will start. Well, the drilling will start, and you'll get production within 90 or 180 days. What will that do to speculators? They stay the hell out of the way because they know that it will not spike. I'm saying no. Okay? So I'm expecting a plateau, a sort of a range of $4 to $8 is where we'll be at. Finally, this resource does have environmental issues. I'm not going to go into them except in Q&A. Most of them are in the area of water. And every time you have an issue, it's an investment opportunity. And the investment opportunity in shale gas will probably be around water and also in telecommunication, which sounds strange, but I will answer it if anybody cares to ask.
Thank you, Vic. So it's a great resource. There's a lot of it. Vic has told us that the price is not only modest today, but we can look forward with some certainty that it's not going to spike in a serious way. It's an obvious marriage between renewables and natural gas to move both forward. Carl, why are we having more of a fight than we should be having between the renewables industry and the gas industry? How do we build that institution? What would it look like?
Well, I think part of the problem is that a significant part of the natural gas industry has a deep cultural and historical affiliation with oil. In fact, many natural gas companies are also oil companies. They don't tend to think of themselves as playing on the clean energy side of the spectrum. And they haven't really been willing to sit down and partner with solar and wind. On the other hand, the solar and wind industries, and I think geothermal is less of a player in this space, the solar and wind industries have had this incredible problem of unreliable capital supplies and unreliable capital prices. So they're desperate. They really can't slow down. And they need to know they can move really fast. And trying to sit down and work things out with another industry is seen as something that slows you down. We at the Sierra Club fundamentally view our job as taking coal out of the picture. We're going to create that space. This country will have shut down half its existing coal-fired capacity by 2025 and probably most of the rest by 2030. So the market space is going to be there. There's plenty of market space that we're going to open up. But I think actually the big risk is that if gas and renewables continue just to do this with each other, the utilities will default to using gas instead of using renewables. I actually think you all in this room have more to lose from the competition than the gas people probably. Because the utilities, it's just easier to think about how you replace coal with gas than it is to replace coal with a mixture of sources.
Can I just Please add to that, Dan? And I agree with the way I think Carl's got it painted the picture. I go back, though, 20 years ago when I was at Mesa Petroleum. We were a large producer of natural gas, one of the largest independents in those days. We had one guy in the marketing department. Independents put gas in a pipeline. That was their marketing. And it went to somebody else, to a utility that was going to burn it. Gas guys didn't market their gas. They marketed it to a pipeline. So I don't know that independent gas producers who now have all this gas they don't know what to do with, I don't know that they're pitted against the renewables. I think often it's at the utility level.
Well, they're complaining. I mean, I'm hearing complaints from both sides. So there is a perception of real competition, which I think I agree with you is largely not there, but people perceive it.
I understand. But I think the gas industry has to figure out they need to market their fuel. And they need to make these relationships, which they haven't done up until the last few years because, they didn't have to market it.
One of the things with gas is that it's been used for peak load for a long time. And because used for peak load, there is a feeling that it costs a lot because that capital is idle for so much that the per unit delivery is very high. It's 3 times the normal, but that's because it's not used very much. If gas is used continuously, the delivered price on gas at $4 an MCF, at $4 a million BTU of natural gas, the delivered price in electricity will be about 4.5 cents a kilowatt hour, okay? A new coal plant today, built to decent standards, will cost you 6 to 6.5 cents a kilowatt hour on a fully loaded price. So this is one of the reasons I mentioned the certitude on the pricing of natural gas. If natural gas stays $4 to $6, it's actually competitive with dirty coal. I'm not even talking clean coal. This is clean coal that nothing's been taken out of it. But supercritical and all that, the best stuff. But so I don't see the juxtaposition at all. Gas has been used for peaking. There's no reason why it can't be used for valleying, if you will. And the valleys which are created by that diurnality of wind and solar. This is artificial. This juxtaposition is artificial.
So public utility commissions, are they part of the answer?
They're part of the answer. Don't you think, Carl? I do. Public utility commissions give the utilities a hard time on the cost of the kilowatt, and they're afraid of the public utility commissions. You ever want to get a utility, you get a rise out of them, say you're going to take them to the PUC.
Well, obviously the regulators should be solving this problem, and in some states the regulators will solve the problem. I hate to say, in a number of states they won't solve the problem.
Right.
You've still got regulatory commissions in the Southeast giving the Southern Company construction work in progress for building new coal plants. That's just insane. That's lunacy. But those commissions are effectively captured. But one of the things that's very important is that as we build out your industries, we build out wind and solar, you guys need to be coming to the table in those public utilities commissions. You need to understand that your future rests largely on highly technical decisions that should be made in the interest of the customer. And if they are made in the interest of the customer, you'll do well. But they are not necessarily being made in the interest of the customer right now.
So we've got some competition, gas, renewables, and over on the transportation side, and I think this is relevant to a number of investors in this room, we've got some competition. We've got small companies putting a lot of money into developing advanced ethanol, cellulosic ethanol, algae-based fuels. You're making a major play over on the natural gas side in transportation. We've got the rise of electric vehicles, as I said, kind of the big kid on the block potentially. How does all that get squared?
Well, see, I don't see a conflict. Talk about space. You got a huge, you've got a 175 billion gallon universe. And I'm not suggesting that every passenger car is going to be on natural gas. It is interesting, though, in Europe there's 62 makes and models, and here in the United States there's 1. So that's kind of weird. But I think the heavy duty, and Carl, we're running heavy duty LNG trucks pulling 80,000 pounds, 350 miles a day, so we know that that's going to happen. I think in certain of these spaces, certain fuels today are ready to go. I don't think there's a battery truck that's going to serve a Walmart deal today, 350 miles a day, every day. That may be the case eventually. But natural gas, I think, has a window for quite a long time in goods movement and fleets, centralized fleets.
I agree. I think there's really there's no conflict there.
There's not. There's plenty for everybody.
It will take the second generation biofuels people a long time to make enough biofuels to replace jet fuel, the one use where you clearly have to have a liquid.
Right.
We've got to, we have railroads burning diesel. That's crazy. We shouldn't, we should electrify part of it, and we should put the rest of it on either natural gas or some biofuel. We shouldn't be importing oil from Saudi Arabia to run a train.
A railroad. And we run a couple railroads today on natural gas. It can be done.
Yeah, it's going to take all of the above, as they said.
It's going to take what?
All of the above, because it's going to take a while to get traction. The key point is replacing oil. That's the key point.
Yeah.
And what you replace it with, you'll have to replace it with all of these things, and they're fit-for-purpose situations. But I like electric cars for a reason that a lot of people don't know. Many people don't. I don't know. Who knows? And that is they're more efficient. If you look at the total efficiency of a car from well to wheel, as we call it, or from coal mine to wheel, the IC engine is around 16%, and electric vehicle, with natural gas supplied power, combined cycle, there are always caveats, is around 28%. All right? That's huge. And now, the numbers don't matter. If you use the same assumptions for both cases, you'll come up with the fact that an electric vehicle is simply more efficient well to wheel. So forget, if you don't want to worry about carbon mitigation, don't worry about it. Worry about energy efficiency. And that's the reason to do it, not even just the zero tailpipe emissions. So for me, electric vehicles are the most favorite. The next most favorite for me is what we call drop-in fuels. Okay? Fuels which walk and talk like gasoline or diesel. These are called alkanes. They can be made from sugarcane, and let's not go into the technology of it. But a drop-in fuel means no change in engine, no change in infrastructure. You don't even know it. It just drops in. These are my two favorites.
We're going to open up for questions in a minute or two, but let me raise one more issue. The natural gas carbon footprint. It's obviously a fossil fuel. It's the cleanest of the fossil fuels, but it's got its own carbon implications. And in fact, there is become some debate about how big that carbon footprint actually is. A professor at Cornell has raised it. There are various people. Where do we end up there?
It's not so much the carbon footprint. We know what the carbon footprint of natural gas is, and it's
the system footprint.
Well, it's the greenhouse footprint, and the problem is methane leakage. And there is a debate going on about what the level of methane leakage is. The good news is we know that huge quantities of methane that are leaking into the atmosphere every year from the globe's natural gas system are leaking in ways that can be easily controlled. The Russian gas pipeline system is horrendously leaky. Right. So we can do a lot to mitigate the methane problem. And the thing people don't factor in is there's a lot of methane in coal. When you blow up a mountaintop, you unavoidably release a huge amount of the methane that was locked in the coal seam that you blew up. So there's a big methane footprint from coal as well. But a very high priority for the regulators ought to be, both domestically and globally, moving very aggressively to make the slowest companies in the industry mimic the behavior of the most technically sophisticated, who are doing a very good job of controlling. After all, they say to me, it's our product. You don't just throw your product out the truck.
So quite a resolvable challenge.
I think so.
Well, things are resolvable technically. Whether they resolve to resolve them is another question. The industry is divided. Pipelines are what's called midstream. It's not the same people who produce the oil. They're not the same people who refine it. And it's a different industry in of itself. And they have to be convinced to go after it. There's probably economic incentives have to provide it. Because there are some cases where you're designed to allow a certain amount of leakage, and that's silly. Okay, but that's the way it is.
All right, some final thoughts. Carl, where do we need to go?
We need to make sure that the public utility commissions do not allow irrational investments in upgrading 50-year-old coal-fired power plants. That is the single most important policy issue facing the energy sector in this country today. There will be massive requirements that these plants be cleaned up, and very, very few of them make any sense to sustain that investment load.
I think important for the gas industry is there's plenty of room here for natural gas. And I don't think that we need to compete against renewables, for instance. We ought to be working together. And I think they're getting that message. And the other thing is, I think there's great room in transportation, certain portions of transportation for natural gas.
I'd like to say that if we want to do what these guys want to do, replace coal with natural gas, put more of the fleet on natural gas, we need cheap and affordable and plentiful natural gas that can only happen, I'm going to say that definitely, can only happen if we have shale gas. And so we cannot allow ourselves to squander this opportunity by not doing the right thing. The right technical thing, to have the right policy to make it happen, that's what we have to do. The shale gas for this nation is the most important energy event since Alaskan oil. Energy event, I'm not talking hydrocarbon. We cannot squander it for the wrong reasons, which is bad information, lack of transparency, and so forth.
Vic, just one last thing, Dan. Vic, you have 3 times as much natural gas as Saudi Arabia has oil. So if we don't figure out a way to correctly harness that, we're crazy.
And I get the last word, and I will simply say we really do need to build this bridge between natural gas and renewables. It's critical. There are a lot more tensions there than there should be. This is a very solid marriage that we really need to advance. And let's not forget the opportunities around energy efficiency. I think putting these three pieces of the stool together, renewables, natural gas, and energy efficiency, we will build a clean energy future, and it's companies in this room that I think are going to give us a good leg up on that. Thank you to our panel, and thank you to all of you.